Welcome to Encounters. This is the first day, and this is the first of our brief exchange sessions, which we've combined the first and the second panel together. So I'd like to just set the scene, really. The idea of this is to put the industry in its development and to try and identify what's important for short filmmakers and what's important to you. So this is our esteemed panel. The focus of this morning is to think about funding. We've got Chris Moll from the newly formed Creative England, and Chris Collins from the BFI Film Fund, and chairing is BRIONY from the British Council Director of Film. So I'm going to pass you over and
do what you like. Okay. Hello everybody, thanks very much for coming. I'm going to be sort of hosting for the whole day really, and I think we've got a great opportunity here to really put a panel of three panels of experts kind of through their paces. The idea of this afternoon, the sessions where we'll be looking at distribution and festivals, is that we get the opportunity to be quite specific about kind of what's out there, what are the kind of what are the offers out there at the moment. What we thought we'd do this morning, we've got a little bit of setting out stalls of our two esteemed colleagues here, explaining kind of where they're up to, what sort of funds they've got available. Should we maybe shut that door? But also we get the opportunity to kind of kick off with what you might call as a kind of state of the nation discussion about the position of short film, about kind of how we got to where we are. Because I think we're in a very particular, I think we're in a very unique position at the moment. This is for the film industry generally. There's been a lot of fluctuation, a lot of drama, a lot of trauma, a lot of change recently. You know, everything from the new government, newish government, to the change from the Film Council to the BFI, to broader issues of arts funding and what's happening to lottery money and the kind of squeeze as a result of the Olympics, and there's a huge range of things going on, as well as the kind of ongoing aspects, the kind of the increase of the new technologies, the 3D, the impact of piracy. There's a kind of, I don't remember a time when all those things have seen so sort of acute and combined with a big change in funding. So I think it's a very a kind of watershed moment for the industry, and what I think we have the opportunity to do today is to figure out if that is going to be if there's going to be a kind of ripple effect down into the field of shorts. And I suppose the kind of opening point to talk about is, was that the correct word? Was down the correct word? Are shorts still seen as a kind of an afterthought or an add-on to the main business of the film industry, or do they have a more important role than that for both of you? I mean, obviously you're both going to say yes, but can you talk a little bit about, or if not, we want to leave quickly.
Thanks for the guidance on that.
Yeah. But do you think that's right? I mean, do you think talk to us about your feeling about shorts and their value within the kind of the value chain?
You have to ask, why people make shorts. What is the, you can go back to real basics. Like what's the point of them? Why do people make them? And it seems to me that they make them because they want to be filmmakers. They want to tell stories and they want to learn, develop their skills as filmmakers. And I think, and I know potentially it's controversial, but I think that actually all filmmakers making shorts actually want to make feature films. So I think there are stages on the way to making feature films. They're about developing your skills, developing your storytelling skills, finding, learning very often. And in terms of, my position on short films, in terms of my strategic responsibility at the BFI's Film Fund, I think shorts are really important. I think they're absolutely crucial. There are very few opportunities for directors and principally directors actually, to really establish their signature, to show that, proclaim their voice, tell people the stories that show people this is the kind of thing I want to make as part of an ongoing talent development journey towards being a feature filmmaker, which is where we all everybody in the end wants to end up, and actually where we get most cultural value out of filmmaking. So that's where I see shorts. I think they're absolutely essential. We should...
But they're essential for the process and for what they tell people rather than for the end result.
I think the end result of a film, you know, whether or not watching a short film is incredibly pleasurable or not is not the point. The point is, does it... The only question I think when I watch a short film is, do I want to see the next thing that this filmmaker makes? You know, do I want to see the feature film this person will make? Mm-hmm. You know, do I want to see another short film by this team or this filmmaker? So I see that as a sort of step on the way, on the path to a goal.
Have you never thought this in its own right is a...
No, of course, I've watched a lot of short films in my life, and many of them, you know, I look at them and think they're brilliant. You know, I saw one the other day, it just blew me away. You know, it's just a perfect example of, you know, of what you can do in terms of telling a story and establishing character and dramatic tension within a, you know, very short time. Which is a little film called Compulsion by Andy McVicker. You know, 15 minutes, beautifully made. You know, and actually, it absolutely did what I needed to do, which is like, well, actually, I'd really like to see what he does next. Mm-hmm. So I think that's, for me, you know, the kind of critical importance of it. Mm-hmm. But also, you know, in terms of developing directors and directors developing their own voice, you know, if you look at the opportunities they have and places they have to do that, television is very difficult to bring your own signature to things unless you get, you know, the very few opportunities to do a single drama, and then they probably make 3 or 4 single dramas a year.
Well, I think that's a bigger issue about television's failure to sort of develop directors in that sort of way.
Across directors, you know.
That's a different session.
Yeah. You know, there aren't many ways in television can do that. Commercials, again, you know, people establish reputations as commercials, but trying to dissociate what the director does with the creative team does, and then, you know, whether they have any ability to work with actors and create drama is also very difficult. Documentaries, similarly, documentary directors often have certain skills, but, you know, whether they can translate to actually putting actors in through dramatic paces is, you know, it's only in a short film can you tell whether the director actually can control the story, create dramatic tension, make choices which you will inform your you know, thinking about what they're going to do next.
Mm-hmm. Chris, do you feel the same? Are they sort of means to an end?
I flip-flop a bit with this, because I think there are two sides to this, one of which is a public funding issue. Because I think from an industrial context, this issue about we want to develop filmmakers ultimately to move towards features, because features are seen as the sort of the cultural, you know, the culturally important area to go to. I understand that, but at the same time, you know, I come from a background of making shorts, you know, very many shorts in my sort of earlier career, and I remember the feeling of doing that. And when I made them, I didn't sit there going, oh, really, what we want to do is make features. We just made them because actually they were fun to make. We had great people around us, and that was just something we wanted to express ourselves. I mean, it was a particular context because we did a lot of, because I came from an animation background, we did a lot of commercial work, so we were continually working where people were telling us what to do, and actually we found shorts as sort of creative freedom, because actually it was our time to do something we wanted to do. So I think from a policy level, you know, of what is the justification for publicly funding shorts, either through BFI, Creative England, all those things, there is one route, which is we want to develop filmmakers of the future, but I would worry if that just became the defining, we sort of took all the other value in shorts, cultural everything out of it. And that's what slightly worries me, because I think also, you know, it's not a precise science. We cannot say that, you know, the short filmmaker, when we see that fantastic short there, suddenly becomes the Steve McQueen of tomorrow, or the Andrea Arnold. It's not precise. And there are so many filmmakers who obviously fall by the wayside and don't do it. And equally, there are directors working today who come up through other routes. So it's just a route. I mean, I agree with Chris. I think that it's the cinematic, them being cinema is key, because I think, you know, it is the short form, and you know, I've done lots of sort of micro budget schemes whereby, you know, we get people to put submissions in and so on, and the short film is still the tool that you use ultimately to judge whether you think that, you know, the team, the director has the chops to make that feature. You see something in the short film that grabs your attention, and often it's that issue about cinematic storytelling, you know, telling story through pictures and action rather than through dialogue, all those sorts of things we love. So I think short films, particularly, you know, short films in cinematic form, is crucial for people developing their aesthetic and developing their voice. I do absolutely feel that.
Do you recognise what I was saying at the beginning, where there's a kind of, you know, this seems to be a kind of watershed time for the industry generally and for shorts specifically. I mean, do you recognise that we're in a very strange place with shorts funding, particularly at the moment, but also exhibition, distribution, kind of reception. You both have kind of been around the block in terms of shorts. You've both been involved in lots of in short schemes, particularly publicly funded schemes, over many years. Not that many, obviously. But do you recognise, do you recognise this as a kind of unique time? And do you have a sense, looking back over, you know, your history with new directors, BFI new directors, or, you know, with other schemes that you've been involved with, do you have a kind of fondness for a particular means of public funding of shorts, or are you kind of up for the challenge of what might come next?
Well, I think actually this is a really good time in many ways. I think, you know, we are in a position now where, you know, accessibility of technology and the means of making films is, you know, there's almost no barrier to entry. Mm-hmm. So you know, everybody's got a camera, everybody's got Final Cut, even Final Cut Pro on their computer, everybody's got a Macintosh, you know, or if not, you know of someone who does. And, you know, those things are really available in a way that even 10 years ago, those kinds of things would have really put people off. Mm-hmm. You know, there would have been barriers for people to actually make things. So, you know, the ability to make films and short films and even long films, almost relatively little cost, is, you know, has fundamentally changed everything. So, you know, that's a good thing. And I think if you just look at the numbers of short films that have, you know, still being submitted to this festival and to the London Short Film Festival, you know, they have not diminished, even though we've had a sort of year of institutional change where funding, especially for short films, has, you know, been on slight hiatus. So that's quite interesting. Is that not
because we're still getting the results of what we had a year ago?
Not all of it, because I think lots of those things have come to an end. You know, some of those are still trickling through. And actually, you know, even though we had a year at the Film Council and just in the last year at the BFI where, you know, all the short film schemes had come to an end, we still managed to fund some short films through our ongoing relationship with Film 4. So we did a series called Transition Shorts, a couple of which are in the festival. Matt Holness's film and John McClane's film, I think, are in the competition here. You know, and they're made at quite high level budgets. You know, £30,000 to £50,000. So people, you know, have real ability to you know, bring production values and make things sort of very professionally. So at that level, there's still been some opportunities to keep things going, but for, you know, for identifying a selected talent.
But in terms of, I mean, you know, quantity is one thing,
yeah.
But in terms of kind of quality, I mean, do you recognise, you know, looking back over the, you know, back
well, I was
in the
just
day,
saying, one thing I do have a fondness for, which was a great scheme, and I'm, you know, really sad it's gone, and under Jeremy Howitt produced some brilliant things, is 10 by 10, you know, which was a BBC Bristol scheme, and, you know, really a lot of people came through that. It's actually was a good format. It got exposure on TV. You know, it was a cheap scheme.
It had a very good editorial.
Yeah. Is that the key to that scheme?
I think key to everything is leadership, isn't it? And editorial judgment and taste and openness. Jeremy was brilliant, actually, when he ran that scheme. And
he runs radio.
And now he runs radio, which is a shame, you know, the great loss, actually, because he had a great skills base and knowledge base. And, you know, lots of great things come through that. And it's, you know, it's a shame that, you know, BBC has withdrawn from that sector. I mean, that has slightly left a gap, I think.
I mean, I think that's a key part in this, because obviously, you know, what the BBC offered through that was not only sort of support editorially, but it was the exposure. You know, that you know, there was a brand within 10 by 10 that people actually went to. You know, they created, because they stuck behind it. They did it for several years. And they gave a very good platform, because it wasn't sort of 10 o'clock, wasn't it? I think it was just before Newsnight or something
exactly,
like
10
that.
to 10, yeah.
And it was a fantastic slot. So it showed actually the value of just, you know, not only supporting people editorially, but just giving them that platform. And in a way, that has gone. I mean, I know that Sky is doing shorts at the moment. They do this thing called Christmas Crackers, and they sort of give a platform for those. There's some short films made through that. But apart from that,
But it only works if you're famous, though.
It only works if you're famous, true. Well, they are varying that a little bit, maybe, but yes, that is true. But the other broadcasters, they're not there. They're not really doing it. I mean, as you say, Film 4 does some, but it's
even
used
then,
as a sort of...
It's a development tool because I think
exactly.
they're not going to program them,
No.
at least to my knowledge. And I don't think, I mean, there was talk of bringing back a slot on Film 4 to screen short films, but I don't know how far that's got and whether that's actually going to happen. So, but on the other hand, there are many other ways of screening short films, which we can come to. So it's not like 10, 15 years ago it was only television where you could show them.
Can you talk a bit, I mean, and I'm sort of meaning proportionally, but budgets have changed dramatically?
Well, I think what happened, just for a bit of history, when the Film Council was set up in 2001, I mean, up to that point, I think there were various sort of schemes in place where, things were funded. The BFI were funding new directors. I think about 35,000. The budget had got to that. British Screen and Film 4 had a scheme called Short and Curlies where their budgets were 80 to 100 grand. So there were, there was a.
Say those figures.
you say that as if it's a lot of money. I mean, 100 grand is not a lot of money.
It's a lot of money in those days.
To make 10 or 15. Well, actually, even then, if you consider that the cost of a low budget feature was £1 million. It was £1 million 15 years ago. It's £1 million today. 10 minutes actually is proportionate to that kind of cost. Actually, if you want to pay people, and you want to have a level of professionalism and production values and so on, so actually it's not a lot of money. However, what happened with the Film Council over those 10 years was there was an idea that somehow you should drive those budgets down. Digital technology, somehow means it's cheaper to make films. Partly is. But as we all know, anybody who's made films, that the cost of making films is really about paying people. So it's about how much you pay people. I mean, I'm old-fashioned. I think people should be paid. I know that some people don't think that. But I think actually it's very hard to achieve a level of professionalism when you don't pay people at least something, and at least, sometimes to motivate people, you have to pay them a reasonable amount.
Well, I think the other thing with those is, as well, it comes back to a conversation I had, I think, 8 years ago with sort of Ken Loach, which he sort of said that when he went to the BBC, the thing that turned him into what he was that he got to work with the best people when he went to the BBC. And I think that's an often bit, because if you do have a short that has a reasonable budget, that's the big opportunity it gives you, in a way, is to actually bring in decent DOPs, decent production designers, where actually they support the director. If you accept the fact that, short films are fundamentally a director's medium, then being able to extend a director by getting them to work with really, really good talent, I think is an important thing, particularly if it fits into a landscape that says we are using shorts as a feeder for features, because that will improve not just the sort of vision of the director, but the craft skills of the director in terms of working with those people. And it's hard to do that if you're always doing shorts at 5 or 10 grand.
And that's what actually has happened. I mean, in those 10 years of the digital shorts initiatives, which were partnerships between the UK Film Council and the various regional screen agencies, the network of regional screen agencies that existed, all of those films were made on budgets of sort of 10 grand.
5 to 10 grand.
Each region was making 5 films at 10 grand. And then there was slight variation that maybe there was a sort of slightly elevated scheme where you get 15 or 20. So there was tiny differences in that. But so really, when all those schemes came to an end, and there was various reviews were written of short films, and and we'd all done a lot of thinking about it. It felt that was an over-prescriptive approach to filmmaking, that we should sort of ascribe more flexibility into the system, really look at what the director wants to do, look at budgets in a sort of much more flexible way, and then think about, how to do that in the future. Now, there's been a bit of, a year where it's been sort of impossible to put any long-term plans in place. So as yet, nothing's kind of concrete is in terms of open access for those kind of things has come. But hopefully in the next year we will be able to do that with a longer term view. Now everything has sort of settled down. please God, for the time being, you know, at least for the next few years. So we, you know, we can plan forward on that.
And given that those budgets have changed so dramatically from 100 grand to
Yeah.
5 grand, take out of the equation the fact that people either got paid or they didn't get paid
Yeah.
for a moment. In terms of the kind of end product, the kind of piece of creativity in itself, do you recognise a lot of difference between those? I mean, does 100 grand make you make a better film?
Not necessarily. I mean, obviously, people, you know, might, you know, just might find it. There might be less pain involved because, you know, a lot of the pain of making any film is, you know, trying to do deals for nothing, or pennies, or £100 here, or, you know, £20 there. In terms of production values, because the technology is so good, you can get great production values. You know, and you can get great casts as well if you're you know cast will do things for very, very little because it's not a lot of their time, and actors want to act, and you know they're generally committed to helping filmmakers make films. But you know, anything that's ambitious in terms of effects, sometimes, you know, if you're in London, you've got a better chance because there's such a sort of pool of resources there. Post-production, you know, you can always get a deal in a post-production house. You can, you know, there's a lot of people floating around who will help you on a short film. I think it's much harder when you get into the regions where there's a smaller pool.
Do you think that's true, Chris?
Yeah, I mean,
in some places,
I think it is. I mean, looking back again, you know, revisiting the past, as it were, one of the guiding criteria, whether it was successful or not, for the sort of digital short scheme that ran for those 10 years, was there was a clear commitment to diversity within it, which was actually getting people who may not have access to those things, communities that in a way weren't given a voice, those sorts of things. So there was a clear remit that ran through short film in regard to that, as well as obviously the thing about providing career progression for people. As I say, I think a lot of work was very valuable in terms of that, whether it translated into finding that you had more, you know, BME directors or male female directors or whatever, I don't know. I mean, I haven't seen the statistics. There probably needs to be a piece of work done to properly look at that and actually look at the 10 years of people that came through and where they went to sort of judge it. But I think it was an important thing, and again, it would worry me if we didn't, in the future, come forward with some sort of way to make sure there was a proper plurality in this, and that it wasn't always the people who, you know, there was an equality of opportunity, I suppose, in terms of getting that support and that, you know, mentorship and being validated, I think, which is part of all of this as well. I mean, you know, the whole thing about being on schemes, whether they're public funded by us or by BFI, is a certain validation as well. The industry is using that to be able to find people. It uses that as a tool, which again, given the landscape is now so busy, you know, it's so hard to find. You know, interesting content and interesting people sometimes.
Just going back one to you both talking about this subject, this figure of kind of 100 grand was this magic figure that you made a film for, which I can't quite believe, which is now the figure that you might make a feature for. Why bother? Why bother make a short?
Well, I think you have to be. Well, it depends. You know, good question. You know, and I think, you know, there are very many examples of things where you actually can make a film, a very valuable feature film, for very small amounts of money. And I always cite the American mumblecore filmmakers in this regard, who I think, you know, brilliant example of people who've really used the technology, created an aesthetic, created a whole kind of, you know, there's maybe 10, 20 filmmakers working in that vein, you know, all of which created a very interesting body of work, very watchable feature films, and some of them are now coming through into, you know, well-funded, more Hollywood things, the Duplass brothers, for instance. You know, they're brilliant examples. It's really hard to make a feature film for 100 grand, I have to say, because you are really in the vein where you are not going to pay anyone or pay them very little. You have to get the scale of the story absolutely dead right. Otherwise, your chances of it working creatively are very minimal. You know, there are some examples of things where that works. I mean, obviously Shifty, the microwave project, you know, it launched Aaron Creevy. He's now gone on to his new film. He's just cutting now. It's a £5 million, you know, thriller. So that really launched him.
Was Shifty 100?
100 grand, yeah, it was a microwave film. And also Andrew Haigh, who's just made Weekend, you know, which is sort of model of that kind of filmmaking, which is a two-hander, which is over a weekend, and, you know, be told, and actually, it's actually going to be a commercial success, which will pay that back. So occasionally it happens, but we haven't had many examples of that in the UK where those things have worked, and they're probably two of the very, very few. The danger in making a film at 100 grand is that it doesn't work, and then you can destroy yourself as a filmmaker as well as launch yourself at that level. You have to be
More
very
with
careful.
a feature than you could with a short?
I think so,
Perhaps
yes,
short is
because a
perhaps
short you can watch it, because remember the audience for shorts is very particular. You do expose yourself much more as a feature than you do as a short. You're going to take a different view.
Well, I'm going to take a different one, because I think there's a sense here which, I think and again, looking back, I think that sometimes within schemes, digital short schemes, cinema stream or whatever, it all went a bit strange, because and it's a classic thing that, as agencies tend to do, which is they come in and say, we're going to tell you how to make a proper short. We're going to tell you how to make a short. And you almost apply the same sorts of processes that you are applied to making a feature in terms of development and all those things to do in a 10-minute film. And that's where it sort of goes wrong. So I think there was one scheme in particular where they sort of spent, 3 months developing a script for a short film. And you go, it's a short film, for God's sake, just go make the bugger. Get on with it, so the Shane Mader's approach. And I think that's where it all got a bit strange sometimes. But I think there is a danger, again, with this, and it comes back to my point about how to make a short film, of telling people how to make a feature. And it's a certain permissive, it's as if there's certain powers that the industry gives you permission to make a film. And I sort of go, well, bollocks to that in some ways.
Well, I wasn't really saying that.
If you want to go and make a 100 grand movie,
of course, and you should. If you've got 100 grand, go and do it. But there are dangers implicit in it. And I think, and I've seen it happen. I've worked with filmmakers who've made, a 10-minute short and then made a feature film, and they're not having the skills to control a story of 90 minutes. It's a much bigger thing to do. It's a much bigger thing to shoot a film over 4 or 6 weeks and do it every day and keep control of it and so on and so forth. I've seen filmmakers fail. Absolutely doing that. And I think you need to have the right number of steps to build up to making a feature very often. And I always cite Andrea Arnold as the perfect example of this. She made 4 shorts and then a feature. And Wasp is a half-hour or 25 minutes short, which won an Oscar. She had, by that time, totally honed her aesthetic, knew exactly what she wanted to do, knew what her approach to life and story was. And that put her in incredibly good stead for when she made Red Road, which just went, hit the world like a rocket. And then she's gone on and on. She gets better and better and better. What she didn't do was jump too fast to that feature. She'd really understood her craft by the time you got there. And and I look at those mumblecore filmmakers. Some of those mumblecore filmmakers made 5 feature films at $3,000 budgets. And actually, Lynn Shelton's a good example. Hump Day was the one that really popped. That was her 3rd feature film, right? Who knows what the other 2 are like? We've never seen them. Maybe nobody's ever seen them. Maybe she's shown to her friends. But
then if she made them as shorts, who'd have seen those?
Yeah,
no, possibly not. I don't know where those 2 films are.
I think what it does is it indicates that actually, there is no one entry level. There's no one path.
I agree with you.
To these
flagging the danger because there are.
No, I think there are danger, but I think there's.
I've seen filmmakers fall on that first feature, and I know they'll never make another one.
I know, but they're in the filmmakers that fall on the short, and they don't get to make the feature anyway because people write.
But at least you make sure you don't have to show anyone.
You don't have to show anyone a feature either.
Well, you do generally because the problem with feature. No, it depends how you fund it. But if you go through let's say if you make it for microwave and you're part of a very public scheme.
That's.
Then if it's people are going to see it.
I think there is a point.
You don't have a choice.
I think there is a point about this about how you expose people, because I think that is a very valid point, which is there are some things that people do whereby if you expose it to an audience, then it can destroy people. But I suppose my thing is that we shouldn't use that as an excuse not to allow people to say that people aren't necessarily ready, because I think in some ways it's again a more dynamic thing.
Okay, well let's talk about audiences then, because I mean, you were being a bit flippant then when you said, well, you know, who needs to develop a short? Just pick up a camera and do it. Well, as somebody who's programmed many shorts into many festivals, don't pick up your camera. You know, don't do it, because somebody's got to watch that stuff. But you,
well, at least think about it first.
They don't. You know, you have to watch it, but then that's your job is to watch it. So I don't have that sympathy in that way. The audience, I have a sympathy.
No, but look, you know, in our positions, it's always about certain responsibility. You know, you have to take a view on whether something's ready to be made or not. You know, I mean, that's the difficulty of it. You want to give people freedom, but on the other hand, you have to be responsible, especially if you're investing, you know, public money into something. So, you know, it's a fine balance between, you know, allowing people to do what they want, especially if you're paying for it. You know, or you know, the government.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm just trying to, sort of do it because you know, there's nothing that breaks my heart more. And you know, you get this if you see in any sort of screen agency when you get, you know, a stack of DVDs on your table that have come in and you just go through them and you think of all the effort, time, money, relationships, probably with your family that have been destroyed because actually at some point in the process somebody didn't say, you know, it's not a very good idea, or where's the script? So, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that, but I'm just trying to, you know, say it's a little bit more dynamic than just to say one path. I mean, we always use this term, which people use, which was, you know, I've used it in policy documents, which is this thing, we get said, ladders of progression. And then somebody said to me the other day, said, oh, well, you know, because it's not a ladder, it's a climbing wall. And I rather like that, because it actually is more like a climbing wall, is you go a bit that way, and then you have to go a bit that way. And this idea that there's one ladder that sort of takes you in this way, I think, is a very not healthy metaphor.
All right, let's talk about audiences then, because obviously those, in the same way that the funding landscape has changed dramatically, that the opportunities for audiences to watch short films has changed beyond our wildest expectations, I would say, certainly mine. I didn't believe the internet was going to work at all, so, you know, look at me. But kind of how much do you think that is how much has the proliferation of ways you can see short films and the kind of you know, the dramatic change there, how much has it affected the way you think about the way shorts are made? I mean, does it mean that you feel you can be more flippant, more throwaway about them? Or do you think the fact that they could be received much more widely than ever in the past, does that make you concentrate more? I mean, what do you feel about that?
I mean, obviously, an explosion of platforms and being able to find them, I think, is fantastic because, you know, it means that, you know, following on from Chris' analogy, anyone can pick up a camera and choose something. Well, you can put it out there and people can see it. So I think, you know, the democratization of that has been fantastic. I think one of the thing that for me has sometimes suffered in that is, again, if you take the approach which is that we as funders primarily, if you ascribe to the industrial view that we're interested in developing filmmakers through to be feature directors, and we're saying that cinematic shorts are the key for us, obviously, well, you need to see those with an audience in a place like this, because that's where you learn how an audience in cinema works with your material, because you sit there in the audience and you know when they're getting bored, and you know when they start shuffling, and you know when they laugh, and all those things that people really learn from sitting with an audience. I suppose one of the worries I have with now how shorts are sort of distributed is that, and this comes down to your session later, which is the role of festivals, is actually how much do people who make that material now learn about how an audience responds to it? Because it's fantastic that, you know, you might get something that's put up and it's 90 seconds and it gets 1 million plus YouTube hits. And they get some nice comments, but I've got absolutely no idea of how that then works with an audience in terms of the feel. And years ago, I did a thing called Joy of 8 here. Joy of 8, which is you know, it's a format that's used by different people in various places, which is, you know, give people a cartridge of Super 8, get them to shoot it on the cartridge, and the first time they see it is with an audience when it's projected, because they don't see it before. And it was fascinating, that, because that was the first experience those filmmakers had got of actually sitting with an audience and just seeing, because, you know, it's 3.5-minute films as well, it's not like 20-minute films. It was just fascinating for those people sitting amongst 400 people, being in an environment where even they hadn't seen their own film. I mean, that's really scary. You know, that's really scary. And of course, you know, most people forgive you for 3.5 minutes because actually you're on to the next one. So even the weak ones sort of survive in that format, which is important because you don't want them crushed. But it occurred to me that it's essential to a filmmaker's development to actually be able to gauge that and learn from how an audience does it. And I suppose I want to see how that is still works within this new distribution landscape that we have. How do filmmakers learn from that? And it shouldn't just be festivals. That's the crucial thing, because festivals ultimately are bubbles. I mean, they just are, because they're filled with the same sorts of people. Let's face it. And my crucial thing is how do you get it to the broader audience out there? Because actually, it's learning with how your film works with that broader audience that is most important and valuable.
Back in the days of BFI production, original BFI production, not this engagement, you were responsible for putting out lottery-funded films, right at the beginning. And I remember very distinctly you always had to provide a distribution plan when you were applying for lottery production funds for shorts. And if I remember rightly, the kind of the icing on the cherry on top of the icing, or whatever the expression is, was the getting my short committed in front of a feature, in cinemas. That was that was what everyone aimed for. That was the ultimate distribution plan. Yeah. Do you think that's matters now? Do you think there are much better ways of people getting their materials?
I don't. Well, there is a very successful scheme, the Virgin Media Shorts, which does programme with cinemas, because they are generally fairly audience-friendly shorts, and they are very short. They're 2 minutes or 2 minutes 20 seconds, I think. They do work quite well before a feature for an unsuspecting audience. And actually, that scheme, which I've been a judge of for the last couple of years, is quite interesting in terms of the access that's given and profile that's given to a whole bunch of short filmmakers. They get huge audiences through their set-top boxes or whatever. It's like in the millions. And I just anecdotally, my daughter and her friends just watch those things on. Nobody's told them to, and in fact, my daughter said, "Oh, Dad, do you know about these Virgin Media Shorts?" And I said, "Oh yeah, I've been a judge on that." She said, "Oh, because they sit there and watch them, just for entertainment." So there is an audience out there who are looking for content, and if they think it's for them, they'll find it. Especially young people who we know are clued into everything. So whether it's through that or through internet platforms. I mean, that's the thing that's revolutionised everything. The fact you can see short films online is just phenomenal. So you can. If somebody tells you this one's good, you can just Google it. In seconds, you've got access to it. That's never been possible before. And that's we do that all the time. Somebody mentions something, you seek it out, you find it, you go, well, there's somebody to watch for the future.
I mean, it sort of does. I mean, I take the point you can't go back to the past, but it does seem to me a missed opportunity, particularly given that obviously audiences are very different. And the audience that comes to a place like Watershed is going to be very different, probably from the audience that heads up the road to the View. And when you have an audience that, that specialised film audience as it used to be, concerned that likes a broader variety of content, it seems to me a missed opportunity when usually there's quite a lot of public funding going into those sort of buildings, not to actually look at how you more strategically display short films in those programmes. It just seems a huge missed opportunity to me. I mean, because that is an audience, I think, that, we're not talking about putting things that are necessarily 25 minutes in front of that feature that's 90 minutes, but I think there is an audience there for it, and we could take advantage of that opportunity. And again, to me then, it also sets out the stall for, again, this, because I think the problem with short films, we treat short films as this sort of amorphous thing, and it's not. There is the YouTube short, and then, as I say, there is the sort of more serious cinematic short, and there's there's a whole panoply of stuff out there, and we need to be a little bit more careful, I think, in terms of how we identify where those niches are, and then what is the best way of exhibiting, distributing them, and things like that. We should play a role in that.
Do you agree with that? I mean, public funding has particularly been sort of pegged to production of short films. Do you think it should be, more broadly distributed now and look at distribution and exhibition and sales and other models?
Completely, yeah. I don't see why not. I mean, it seems to be a little bit insane to support the production of things and then not look at ways of supporting the distribution and exhibition of things, especially if they have merit. You know, why wouldn't you?
Do you both have particular models that you think?
Well, I think
actually
for
that's
years
really
we got hung up. I mean, we did get hung up on this thing that, you know, somehow we'd make some money back, which was always one of the
We're over that now.
which I have to say, you know, again, was one of the ludicrous things. I mean, Chris referred to it, you know, about changing structures, and we sort of look back on it, and this whole business that we thought we might recoup some money off these short films, in retrospect, just looks like.
Having said that, occasionally some films make some money, but I think in the whole history of the UK digital shorts, there's probably two that have made some money. Or there's a handful anyway, you know.
So I think once you get off that hobby horse about, you know, ownership and you know, rights and recoupment and all that sort of crap, and just treat them as, well, we want to get the audience to them in the same way as we want to get more audience to come see more feature films and different types of feature films, then I think it's a more interesting debate, really. And I do think that we need to look at it as not as shorts and features. There are exhibition and distribution wise, there are some interesting areas that they could feed each other. And I think we need to be a bit more imaginative about it. Particularly if we're pumping lots of money into supporting them, you know. Seems crazy to me,
we need to take some questions, but just before we do, I think let's invite you to set out your stalls, really. You've both got relatively new schemes kind of coming on board. You're both actively looking at what you can do in terms of short production, exhibition, distribution and so forth. Do you want to tell us a bit about where you're up to?
Yeah, what we decided to do this year is as a one-off thing for next year, just commission 20 short films to basically give, you know, 20 opportunities to directors to make, you know, relatively well-budgeted films, so somewhere between 25 and 50 grand. And we've just tendered for a company to manage that scheme, and that process will have come to an end. Probably by Christmas we'll have somebody in place, and so we'll be able to launch that scheme in January. You know, the barrier to entry of that scheme will be not quite high, well, relatively high in the sense that you will have had to have, you know, either a short or some really strong demonstration of sort of visual storytelling skills in order to have a chance of getting one of those opportunities. But, you know, I think if we can make 20 films in the next year, which, you know, relatively well funded, we should be able to, at the end of next year, have a, you know, a really interesting body of work. So, you know, we'll do that next year. And as I say, over the next year, we'll hopefully be able to launch a longer-term kind of plan for how we look at short films as a part of a holistic development strategy for filmmaking talent.
And the people who aren't already at the point, you know, they're not one of your 20, do you have an alternative for the kind of new newcomers? Well,
it goes back to the original thing, which is that actually, for the first steps, you know, everything's available to you in terms of technology, and, you know, you just go out and do it in order to get to the next step. I mean, ultimately, I do think, you know, well, films cost money, whatever you do, you know, and if, you know, sometimes £1,000 is a lot of money for people to spend on something.
To what?
To spend. You know, even £1,000, £500, you know, is a huge amount of money for lots of people. It stops them doing. So, you know, ultimately, I'm really keen on these certain schemes that have run before. I think they're you know, they're very great benefit, like the London boroughs. You know, very low budget schemes where you get £2,000 to £3,000, you know, almost as a grant to go and you know, just make something. And that actually produces a great deal of green shoots you ran in Vision Media.
Vision Media in the Northwest.
Yeah, and actually really good things come out of that. So I would like to see a whole raft of ground level opportunities at that level in order to get people, you know, almost you just need to make a first shot with nothing, just, you know, in your back garden with you know, camera you borrowed from your friend. Then you know, maybe you'd go to this next level, and ultimately you'll find yourself, you know, well-funded level.
Chris, what have you got going on?
Well, I mean, Credit England was started on the 1st of October, so it's now the middle of November, so it's still early days. I mean, we will probably look at providing some support over the next few months for some completion support for shorts, because I think there is a value to that sort of thing. It used to be, I think, in Film Council's portfolio, didn't it, in terms of...
Yeah, there was a completion fund.
Run by shorts. Yeah. And, you know, obviously I'm looking from an English regions point of view, which means everywhere outside of London, but not the nations as well. that I think there's a case for some of that support at the moment. We're going to take a wait and see approach in terms of, reflecting what Chris has said out of what comes out of the film policy review, because I think hopefully what will come out of that is some sort of national talent development strategy, which will have the BFI, it will have Creative England, it will have the national screen agencies, hopefully it will have Film 4, BBC, and actually we look at this thing a little bit more strategically and say, okay, where are the various points in the pyramid and how do we work together to support that? Mm-hmm. So again, with Chris, I'm very keen. I mean, I think that, again, looking back at digital shorts and what was done with the screen agencies with that, there were a lot of good things. The key thing for me is you can do a lot with £2,000–3,000 as investments. The key thing is what you require for that money. And I think sometimes, in terms of, as a public funder, what support do you offer back and what do you want back? And I think we need to sort of finesse that with the filmmakers in terms of actually how we work with it. Because there's, whether you operate it as a sort of scheme or whether it is a bit more free-flowing and bespoke, I don't yet know. We haven't sort of made up our mind, and I don't want to until I've actually talked to what that community is. I think there is value in terms of having peer group schemes offer you that, because you get people together and they feed off each other, and that's an interesting thing. And then you get a community, and I think there are values to those, but sometimes they can be very prescriptive. I'm sort of not so keen, maybe we've made some mistakes in the past about that. So it's a very long-winded way of saying, in a way, we're taking a slightly, for the next 6 months anyway, wait-and-see approach until we've got through this period with the film policy review, until the relationship with the BFI and the various other partners is established, and then we can come out and say, okay, this is exactly how we think we need to support this area. But we will do it. We're not going to suddenly abandon it and sort of leave it entirely to the sort of market.
The film policy review reminds me, actually, you both presumably took part in various discussions as part of the review. Did you get a sense from the sort of assembled masses? I know some of those were open meetings, some of those were kind of invited industry meetings, but did you get a sense of what sort of provision people were hoping for in terms of shorts? I mean, do you, I know you both have an opinion about what might work, what has worked in the past, what you definitely don't want to see, but did you get a sense from broader constituents about what people needed or hoped for?
Well, I haven't been part of the film policy review because the film policy review is partly about what we do. So I think it's, but you have. I was
allowed to go to two of them. Yeah. I don't think you did, actually. I think as short films as a sort of, as a subject, I don't think so. I think within a talent development strategy, yes. But it is very much within that that view of where does short sit within a talent development strategy that again sort of heads in a certain direction. So I think shorts and their value is recognised within that. So it has to be, I think from a policy point of view, it has to be looked at in that context. Because I think in some ways the argument about short films, cultural value and things, and even some of the things I said originally about diversity, they've sort of gone a bit quiet in there. I think they will come back, but I think they probably need to be bolted back on once the talent development bit has been sorted. You say, well, we've got a talent development strategy, but what sort of talent do we want to come through it, and how diverse do we want it to be, and what are its concerns? Do we want a cinema that is a certain commercial cinema, or is it a cultural cinema, or is it reflective of all of the bits of the UK? All of those arguments that we see played out at a feature level actually are equally relevant to the shorts, because ultimately if you say that you're trying to get short filmmakers to be that feature things, then those are concerns to them as well.
This would be a good moment, I think, to jump in with any questions that you have. I wonder if anyone is tweeting.
I've got one Facebook question.
Oh, go on then. Facebook, was that an option?
Facebook question.
It's an internet thing.
Oh, it's an internet thing.
You might not have heard.
It's not going to work.
Yeah.
So, why do we never see short films adverts at the cinema?
Why do we never see what?
Short film adverts.
Short film
I don't understand the question, do you?
Ads, advertising. I think it's as in when you get into the cinema and then
why don't you just see short film?
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So why do we never see them?
I'm a bit confused.
How should we interpret that film?
I'm assuming the question is why don't we see shorts at the cinema?
Yes.
Right, okay.
Okay.
And we know the
sort
answer
of
to that,
answered that
don't
earlier,
we?
didn't
We know the answer to that because it's not because there's no commercial
There's
imperative.
no commercial imperative, absolutely. And there's no stick to be, you know, and there's an argument that says the audience doesn't want to see them, therefore we don't have them. Now, whether that's true, we discussed that earlier. They like Pixar shorts, the audience, probably.
Yeah.
For me, what seems to be happening now, because there is a massive shift in how films are distributed and how films are produced, and like you say, cheap technology and all this sort of thing. It reminds me a bit of like the punk DIY aesthetic of the 70s in relation to music happening to film now. What concerns me a bit is like this. Is like you were saying, there's this very idea that you make a short film and you make a feature film, and then if that film makes money, you make another film, and it's all sort of dictated by the market, what's successful, what makes money, all this sort of thing. And I wonder whether it's better to look at success in a different way, rather than, you know, what's successful. Is a film successful? Like, I made a short film about the dubstep music scene in Bristol, which we sold a couple of 100 copies through a local record shop through their website, and then put it up online for nothing, and 3,000 people downloaded it. Is that a success? Should that be support? Do you see what I mean? I think this idea of...
Sounds like success to me.
I think it's a very good point, because I think, you know, we're not very good at the moment of measuring the value of, particularly in terms of public investment. It's a real problem. Well, how we measure success, actually. Because, you know, success is measured in film terms, has been measured for years in terms of, you know, box office figures and those things. Well, it's never been really measured in terms of eyeballs, because nobody's really got some sort of way of measuring eyeballs of actually people who go and see it. And of course, when you go and see it, you get into the other issue, which is what was the qualitative value of that, how many people liked it, and of course the BBC now does a lot of qualitative in terms of its ratings and so on. And I think we've been very bad at actually looking at asking that question of what does success look like, because we've had very narrow views of actually that. I think it is time, I mean it should be time, given we're in the middle of a film policy review that's going to determine what that public funding is over the next few years, of how do we want actually to measure success. And what are the sort of valid metrics for that?
As I understand it, you know, the Film Policy Review have looked at those quantifiers, you know, and obviously, you know, there are those arguments around what they are. I mean, box office still stands as one. You know, editorial reaction is obviously another. For features, there's very clear indicators. For shorts, it's much more difficult. I mean, you know, just in terms of, you know, in features, out of the Distribution and Exhibition Fund at the BFI, you know, every time they support a project for distribution, they commission exit polls. So you get actually some feedback on whether people actually like the film, what they thought, you know, whether it was the film they thought they were going to see and all that kind of stuff. So actually it's really good. You know, there's some really good statistics on that. So as part of the investment of public money, that happens on a feature film level. Much harder to quantify on a short film level. But, you know, that your stories does sound like, you know, a huge success. I think if we had, you know, the rough trade, you know, or the small wonder kind of approach to distribution and networking, you know, and production, it's hugely valuable. I think that's where we are actually in terms of the availability of technology, the ability to get out onto platforms, the fact you can do anything. Unfortunately, what we yet haven't had is the Sex Pistols of short film making, or the Clash, or even the Damned. We haven't yet had anybody who's made that much.
Even the Damned.
Well, my favourites, but you know they're lower down, you know, in terms of the hierarchy of punk bands, let's say. You know what I mean? You know, you know, where are those people who've really kind of come out of the traps, going, well, this is, you know, this is different. This is going to change the world. You know. We haven't had that. We haven't had that out of UK independent feature filmmaking yet. You know, where's our Spike Lee or a Jim Jarmusch or you know, somebody who's really changed the way we think about the landscape of feature filmmaking or short filmmaking. You know, that hasn't happened.
Do you think that might?
I'm not quite sure why it hasn't happened as well, because it happens in all other areas of British culture, and we really need to grapple with that.
Well, I would argue this you'd be looking at more like the model of Crass than the model of the Sex Pistols or the Clash, which was, you know, well, make more, no, but more like if this idea of success is almost again what we're sort of saying is how do we get to this place where we've got the Spike Lees and the Jim Jarmusch and all these making these big films? That's what I think's wrong. I think it's more about looking at what is success in terms of, like, lots of people will be creating films for niche audiences, not necessarily, which would never do well in multiplexes or big. I'm not saying that you shouldn't have these sort of.
I mean, it's like rough trade. You know, you keep doing the same thing on a small scale, and you have a great character, and you know, you carve out a cultural space for yourself, which everybody understands, you know, and has value. But it's not going to take over the world. It just slightly shifts the way you think about things.
And it's how that's supported, really. The filmmakers, because I feel a lot of filmmakers spend more time trying to get funding when they could make a film, but more effort goes into trying to get funding, which they don't usually get, in order to make a film, and then it's so difficult to break through anyway. I would much rather see a model where people are actually supported to do what they're really interested in doing. And actually, if your film only goes out to a couple of thousand people in your niche, but you're supported by public money to do that, and you know, you might even get your return on that. You might get your couple of grand back on that, but that £2,000 or £1,000 for, you know, I know someone in Bristol at the moment wants to make a film about gangs in Bristol or friends and stuff. £1,000 for that person would be, would enable that project to happen. Okay, you might not, they might not become the next Andrea Arnold or whatever, but surely we want that's a reflection of loads of voices. And you know, I just think the whole idea of this progression is really, like, I just sit here thinking, God, well, what's the chance of anybody in this room actually getting to that point where they're going to release a feature film and it's going to be, I mean, they're so controlled by multinational companies anyway. It's like, that's... Isn't
it about just identifying your ambition, understanding what it is that you're trying to do? You want to make your films for a particular audience. I might want to make a film for, you know, me and my family. You might want to make your feature. Well, it's about setting your...
Look, people should be supported to do different things and develop different, rather than like this progression. Which I'm pretty much sure
we can be very open to different things. If somebody has a great idea and says, you know, I can make a film for £5,000 and it's going to play to this audience, and I know, you know, every one of these people I know on my Facebook account will pay £1 or something. You know, maybe that's a really good model. You know, that I'm sure we'll see those in the next few years, no question about it. But ultimately, our aim is, especially with you know, huge amounts of public funding, is to try and make British film as good as it can possibly be, to have as wide as possible reach as it can be, you know, but also be as eclectic as it can be. So you can still make small films which are driven by personal ambition and you know, character, which play to relatively small audiences. But as long as they're good, then that's the only thing that really matters. So that's all of we've all got to aim for, is make them as good as possible. But also being aware of the audience and where it's going to play is obviously a critical part of that.
Yeah, actually, I was just going to follow on from this in a sense that I remember, I'm old and grey, the era of the workshop and how important that was for people. And also, for example, Shane Meadows could not have got to where he got if he hadn't had Nottingham to hang around with. And it seems to me that there is a lack of policy from the filmmakers in, maybe I'm being a bit critical, in not getting together with education. Because if now billions of people, well, not billions, but thousands and thousands of people are coming out of education courses making short films, they're suddenly stopped from it unless, and there's suddenly something called the film industry or BFI support, blah. Whereas actually, you know, what this gentleman's talking about, a few bits of kit and a few bits of booking would enable people to make short films without feeling that every time they were putting their soul on the line.
But don't you think people can do that now?
I think we can, but I think we should. I'm not sure that, I don't know what, okay, the question is what is happening, where are the education bodies on this policy thing, what is happening with the relationship and the relationships between education and whatever workshop connections we might call them. They might even be e-workshops these days because it's so different. I'd sort of put out a challenge to you. I'm prepared to go in for it if you're prepared to go in for it.
Well, I'm with you on the workshops. I'm really keen on those. I mean, I made my first short film at Western London Media Workshop, you know, and they you know, it was a great opportunity to borrow some equipment actually, and borrow some editing facilities, and you know, that was the first thing I ever made. You know, and if without that, I don't know if I'd be sitting here today, to be honest. Shane Meadows is another, you know, the poster boy for that that kind of intervention. You know, so I think they are really good, and I think we can. look at how to incorporate that kind of opportunity in whatever we do in the future. Just in terms of the role of education, the BFI, as part of its own policy review, is looking at how all these things fit together in a sort of cradle-to-grave kind of way of thinking about how film informs you and how you intervene in it and what you learn from it and how you then feed back into it. So, that is part of what the BFI's 5-year plan will be, and I think that will start coming out. The results of that will come out, early next year.
I think that the thing you raised, which is about physical spaces, is important, because that's I didn't go through workshops, but that's what I'm sort of hearing. And I think there is a case to be made to look at how these sort of physical hubs in places can actually enable that much more. The watershed obviously does interesting things in some of those areas, and it obviously uses initiatives like Depict, Electric December and those sorts of things to galvanise that. But I think there's a sort of greater role, and I think it is about how, again, it's where the industry area sits with that, because the industry will look at it from the point of view of saying, okay, how can we enable that, work with that, to then sort of cherry pick the talent that we think that we can feed through. That's just an industry view of how the sort of relationship to those works. With education, I think it is problematic. It has been. I'm not saying, because I think there's a sense that there is a disconnect between what is being done, particularly at undergraduate level, and how that relates to the industry. And we sort of know the arguments around this, which is, the Daily Mail headlines about turning out endless media graduates that have no real future in the industry because there aren't the jobs for them, all these sorts of things. So I think there is a problem here. And there are some people who've actually sort of almost abandoned working with that undergraduate space without sort of really understanding how they can help to sort of work with it and re-inform it. So I think that does need to be looked at, but they need to decide what the agendas are, because again, if it's a purely industrial agenda, or is it a cultural agenda, or is it an educational agenda? There's lots of different agendas. It's a skills agenda, and we know that, there's always, one of the things, I shouldn't say this, but there was always the thing when I went to these film policies, let's talk about the skill set question in some ways. So I think there's a lot of work, and hopefully, again, it will come out of film policy review that says, actually, maybe this is a route for how higher education, further education, skill set, and the screen agencies and the agencies need to work more collaboratively together. I don't know the answer. I hear it. I hear what you're saying.
The skill set thing is very interesting. Obviously there are different patterns of address in different places, but my experience of it is that.
So you're talking about skill set, the organisation, or skill set, that skill set?
Skill set, the organisation, and what they do. Just in case, does everyone know what skill set is? Yeah, most people. Okay. It started being, I think it was a brilliant initiative because it started being these two hostile camps, and they have become, where I am, a very, very good intersection of beginning to understand each other. And it seems to me community, especially in the sort of branded world we're now in, about a huge budget, so film industry, whatever, is getting more and more separated from the craft skills of people. And I think we've got to go the same way if we're in public funding.
I think so, because there are lots of issues going around conservatoires, the conservatoire systems and things like that. And why can't we have a decent conservatoire system in this country because other countries have it and so on? So I think there's a whole area about how you actually turn out, crudely, how you turn out the future filmmakers with the right skills, because this is the issue about creative skills, craft skills.
Without being so isolated, which is where I go back to this gentleman, that feeling that you do the odd short, you don't sit in a place where making shorts is the natural thing to do, and you come together, you talk about them, etc., etc.
I think it's part. That's what we go down to Shane Meadows route, which is he just went out and did them. It wasn't that each one had to be this what I call the Fabergé egg syndrome, which is the perfect thing each time. It's a matter of you get good at what you do. If you spend your time filling in funding applications, you get good at filling in forms. If you get spend your time making stuff, you'll get good at doing that. Or you won't. You'll decide we won't.
Just before I ask James, can I just ask who's actually made a film here already? And of those, have any of them been publicly funded? Yes or no? Okay, so some people have experience. Okay, well, might ask for some feedback shortly about your own experiences. But James,
may I ask a couple of quick questions? Could the quizzes tell us how much they're spending on making films, getting films made next year, please? And if they can't tell us that today, can they tell us when they can tell us? And Bronnie, could you tell us how your department, the British Council, enables filmmakers? I did. I stopped. I caught myself. I'd be interested in hearing, especially that you're new in the post, what plans you have for the work of the film department.
okay, cool. I'll do that in 1 sec. You first.
Me?
Yep.
I've reserved, I think, £900,000 out of our budget this year to pay for the 20 films we're going to make this year.
Did you say 90?
900. 900,
okay, sorry. Just knocked a bit off there.
As I say, I don't have an allocation specifically for short films. I mean, we have, still to be decided, but the headline figure is, I think, is about 800 grand in terms of talent development support that we have in a 12-month period. Obviously, that's early days. We shall see what happens over the next few months.
Okay. And in terms of my role, I'm director of film for the British Council. The British Council is a Foreign Office funded organisation which is about cultural relationships, international cultural relationships. There is a big arts department, and each of the arts department is divided into different sections, so dance and drama, visual arts and film and various others. My remit is really to promote promote UK films and filmmakers internationally and find opportunities for kind of cultural exchange. So it's a little bit about us going there and telling the world we're great, and a little bit about finding partnerships, you know, both inspirational, educational, for our filmmakers and film bodies elsewhere. And we do a number of different things in relation to shorts. There are probably kind of two things that you might need to know about. The first is our relationship with festivals, and this is something which we have a big relationship with some of the high-profile festivals like the Sundances and Tribeca and Cannes and Berlin and so forth, where we bring the programmers into the UK once a year and put them in front of 2-3 days worth of UK features largely. We have formerly had a relationship with some of the shorts festivals, Oberhausen, Clermont-Ferrand and so forth, and done a similar thing with them, and that actually has been abandoned over the last couple of years. My role, the department has been, arts generally and my department specifically has been suffering over the last couple of years. The fact that arts is now one of the top priorities for the British Council, the first time ever, which is a major sea change and a very good one for all of you and for all of us. And film department was nearly disbanded last year, and the fact that they've appointed me, I now have a team just in place, 2 of them this week, and we now have budgets and a kind of commitment to building up film offer internationally. I think is a very good thing, a very good news story, a very surprising good news story in what is otherwise a rather bleak landscape. But so one of the things that I'm going to be doing is looking specifically at shorts, both in the formal relationship that we have with the short film festivals, both here and internationally, but also we have a thing called the Short Film Promotion Scheme. Some of you may know this scheme. When I first got to the council, which was just 2 months ago, I didn't know what this scheme was. It was people submitting shorts, which were then kind of approved or not approved by the British Council, and then what? Nothing. It used to be associated with travel grants. It used to be associated with formal representation to international film festivals. Neither of those things happens at the moment. So I was about to disband the scheme, and then I went and started talking to filmmakers, the kind of Andrea Arnolds, David Mackenzie's, Asif Kapardias, you know, all the filmmakers who we know and love their work now, Joanna Hogg, Clara Bernard, all those people once had a film supported by the British Council's Short Film Promotion Scheme. There's a lot of love for that scheme, and at the moment, as far as I can see, it's a scheme with very few benefits. So what we've done is put the scheme on hold in order not to disband it, but in order to kind of build it back up, possibly put some travel grants associated with it, which would mean if you got your film into an international festival, you'd have some support to go and take it, you know, meet people, present your film properly. But also other benefits. And I'm very interested to hear kind of what sort of things people would need in order to get your work in front of international audiences. That's very much what we're about. It's about expanding the kind of potential audience or potential collaboration that you might do in the future for short filmmakers particularly. So it's a kind of watch this space. Oh, sorry, one final thing. We also have a very, very beautiful new website. I can say that because I didn't design it. I did get to launch it in my sort of second week of being in my job. So people thought it was really fantastic. God, she's been there for 2 weeks. Look at this website. But anyway, it is amazing website. It's focused around 3 directories, really: films, filmmakers, and international festivals. So it's a very good kind of go-to site for information about the festival world and of films that are in production, films that are being made, so you can understand kind of the landscape of UK films and filmmakers. There is we are encouraging people to put their films onto the site. There is a sort of suggest a film button. If you are in production with a film or in pre-production with a film, put your film on the site. It has 7,000 entries at the moment, and it's becoming the kind of go-to site, particularly for international festival programmers. There are lots of very cool, funky little research buttons. It's very user-friendly, and people are using it a lot now. So I really encourage you to put your films on the site, because that should be one of the first places that people will look if they're looking for kind of, a snapshot of British work. That's enough for me.
6,248 films on your list.
Good, eh? I put them all on myself in 2 weeks. Right, so I wonder if, is there any, oh yes, quick, yes?
I've got a entirely different question actually. One of the things both Chris's actually alluded to is talking about shorts being primarily a medium for directors. What about the rest of us? What about the producers? What about the production designers who are also looking for shorts to develop them and to go on to features? Are you saying that you're not interested in us? Or I know that's not what you're saying, but that was the worry I was getting earlier.
No, I didn't mean it in that way at all. I mean, it wasn't meant to be pejorative, I've been a producer myself, so, not at all. But ultimately, I was saying, the driver for publicly supporting short films tends to sit with the director, and it's the director, if you're going to take an approach that says that ultimately it's there to show the director off, then that's its primary function. I think that in terms of producers particularly, it's extraordinarily useful. I mean, if you've got, whether you're having to do one at £5,000, which means you're going to have to go out and beg, borrow and steal, or you get 100 grand and it becomes a bit easier for you, but that brings its own problems because there's other things with it. I think it's hugely valuable. I think, interestingly to me, because obviously at the moment I'm running various low budget schemes, and so I'm always interested in the transition from shorts to feature films, so that sort of level. And for both producers and directors, it's still a huge step up because the mechanics of how those two things operate are very vastly different. And one of the experiences we find also with shorts, and I think is very interesting with shorts, is shorts also tend to be a very writer-director-led medium. And I'm always interested in how that writer-director bit translates also to features, and the challenges that often writer-directors making that move face, because they tend to find out at that point in the development of that whether they really are genuinely a writer-director or actually they're more a director than a writer, or a writer more than a director. And of course, that really teases that out when they have to do that first one. Chris has experience as well. But I also think, I used to be very old-fashioned about producing, which is, I used to be of the era where the producers did it all. It was that first in, last out. And then I suddenly realised over the last few years that it is now almost impossible for producers to do all that, which is why you get all these people called exec producers and associate producers and the myriad of producers, and I used to go, what do they all do? And I sort of suddenly realised what it was. I mean, apart from just, everything's multi-party financing, but it's almost impossible now to find the Renaissance producer who can actually handle all of the aspects, particularly now the complications of getting that film to the audience, marketing, digital, all those things. Finding those people is now very rare. So I think the key thing, again, that shorts do, and again, an area I'm very keen on, is teaching those collaborative skills, because that's the crucial bit about shorts is people learn at that shorts level how they collaborate with people, how they get the best from people, how they crudely talent manage. And that is still the core producer's skill, is talent, managing talent. But they also learn their limitations, to use Clint's form. You've got to know your limitations, but then also how you find people who can fill those limitations and how you work with them. So I think, shorts still remain hugely valuable for producers, but to me it still is a big step up to then go up to feature.
Shorts, writer-director medium?
They can be, they tend to be. Not quite sure why directors don't work with writers more on shorts, actually, because it's actually a really good opportunity to try and work with people who can, do all the hard work on getting the story right. So, that's, a perennial kind of talent gap that we need to work on. Otherwise, shorts are brilliant for everybody. They're a great training ground particularly for producers, I would say, because when you make a short, you often have to be really hands-on as a producer, so you really understand what the value of the money means, whatever the level of the budget is. Those producers who come in to being producers who come from other disciplines have a very much more distanced relationship to that, and then they leave everything to the line producer, and often they can't control it or help it, guide it in the same way. And I think when you're doing shorts, you really know the value of every penny. They're also great training grounds for DPs. DPs can really, often DPs get picked up because they've done a great short. You look at it and you think, well, that guy's good. Well, that woman's, fantastic. Well, let's use them. They're great showcases for lots of the other people involved. So there's huge benefits.
The DigiShort scheme used to be able to apply in certain regions, either as a producer or a writer or a director, or any weird combination of both.
That's right.
I remember we got quite a few writer-producers through, which might have just been an economies of scale thing.
So just to kind of follow on from that, I think what I'm really asking is, for instance, if we were to apply for funding through BFI or Creative England for shorts, would you be as interested if the producer has got a lot of experience but perhaps the writer-director hasn't as much? How does that work for you? I think that's what I'm trying to establish, is whether the producer for you holds enough standing.
Well, obviously, if the director comes in with a producer who you think most actually can deliver what they want to do, that's going to really help. If not, then you think, well, maybe that needs an executive producer. You might need some help there. So, one's never going to discount something because of the producer, but you might have to think there's other ways you might need to assist that project. But primarily those projects are going to be selected on who the director is and what story they want to tell is.
I mean, my practice is always you're looking for just a well-balanced team, and that can mean a very experienced team, but it can also mean that you're mixing it up a bit. So as long as it's got a balance in it and it's very clear where the support is needed and where it's not so appropriate, then that's fine.
I was just going to say that it's interesting that we were talking about the role of the micro budget feature, which I think is going to become, has perhaps been one of the changes that you were talking about in the past few years, and that shorts in a way sometimes can be quite dangerous for feature films and that transition, because for a 3 or 4 day shoot you can kind of kill yourself in a way that is not sustainable on a kind of 20, 15, 20 day kind of shoot. And so I just kind of wondered about thoughts on that kind of micro budget leap, and whether in kind of weighing up, is this person right to make a transition if they have done a feature film for, kind of begging, borrowing and stealing, which tells a story, albeit in a limited visual way, whether that is valued as much. I understand that Andrew Haigh had actually made a very, very small budget film before Weekend, which I'm assuming that he learned from, because I think it was one of the decisions for him to strip back the coverage for Weekend, which shows that there was that kind of learning process.
Well, he's also made a few shorts before, Andrew, and including a Cinema Extreme, which is quite well budgeted short. So he'd done a lot of different things to get him to that point. I mean, the film he made before Weekend was a sort of documentary, isn't it? It's a documentary drama. It's Greek people. Yeah. So it's quite different form, but I'm sure he learned a huge amount from that. I mean, I think that shows. The more you do, the more you learn your craft. Particularly you learn about what you can do within a limited time and what you can do well. I mean, that's the big question. If you don't learn that from your short film making, then you're never going to make a good film.
Do you worry about that, though, for people who might have made a very high-end short, which is particularly, it's got a great vision, but then when you're looking for, just trying to think, is that person, can they make a feature at a certain budget level?
Well, it's always difficult. It's like people who make commercials, you know, they get used to a very particular way. You know, somebody brings them a cappuccino every 10 seconds. You know, if you're making a low-budget feature, you know, it's not going to happen. So there's always a steep learning curve. Some people can adjust to it and other people can't, you know. It's always a risk, actually. You just have to try and get a sense of whether they really know what it means to make a film for £100,000 or £500,000 or even £1 million is hard to make a film on.
Can I just, I know we're probably going to expire in this rather hot room, but I just have a couple of tiny questions that I just want to kind of get out of the way while we've got you here. How long is a short? You know, we talk about shorts. I know a lot of the schemes that have happened in the past have kind of said, right, shorts under 10 minutes or shorts under 25 or shorts whatever. Do you have a view about your kind of the optimum short length?
I don't think flexibility is key to everything. How long's the story? Yeah. How long can it sustain itself? I actually think the 20-25 minute length is a really good length for filmmakers to learn how to maintain a story. If you can do it you can probably get to 90 minutes in that way. So, you know, and that's often the bit that's been missing for our filmmakers. And, you know, the ones who do make that, and actually you look at Andre Arnold, Martin McDonagh's shorts, which also won an Oscar, was a half-hour short. You know, he went on to make an outstanding first film. So, you know, it really helps to do films of that length. The 10-minute short, you know, is the staple of you know, the short film industry because it's relatively easy to get to that. You know, whether you can get away without telling much of a story on that level.
And now I'll trot out the line that I always do at this point, which is as a former festival programmer, I have never, ever, ever in all my years of watching short films got to the end and thought, oh, I wish that was longer. Like, never. However brilliant, however fantastic. So it's a little lesson for you. And the other question is the sort of means of production now that we're in this digital age. 35 mil? Back on? Never bothered
So
looking at?
what is that?
What is that? Okay.
Yeah.
But I mean, is there any value in people having a thirst to make 35 mil?
Not really. For me, no. Not unless unless you're an artist, unless you're tacit and you've got some relationship to the tactile quality of the material or something. You know, digital formats are brilliant and they work just as well. They're much more economic.
I mean, it's an interesting one because I think, you know, if somebody's got the money and wants to make it on 35, then who am I to say don't make it? You know, if there's an aesthetic reason to do it and they feel very passionately about that, then great. I mean, I think there is another point which is, again, it comes back to my thing about Gervais, is there's a certain purity, there's a certain lovely purity about film in that you can't squirt off loads of it because you haven't got enough money to do it, and that imposes a certain discipline and things like that. So I suppose if that's important to you, and you regard that as important in terms of how you're testing ground and how you want to test yourself, then that's a perfectly valid thing to do. So I think there are certain, you know, although per se it's not important, I think there are sort of interesting areas of aesthetically and discipline-wise that come with film that may make it valid for what you want to do.
I mean, just on the production values point, you know, the shorts that really don't work for me are the ones which are hugely overproduced, you know, which are 35 mil and they've got a crane and they've got this and they've got that and they've got some name actors that you've pulled in because their mum knows them or something, you know, and it's like all about the production values, you know, and they're the ones which turn you off. Me,
empty heart.
You know, so you have to be, you know, you don't need 35 mil. You don't need a crane. You know, you just have to get it. You have to get the scale of it right to suit the story. You know, and you know, don't waste some precious resources you've got on things you don't need.
Well, again, I mean, it depends. If you don't want to throw you 35 mil and do it, then
unless it's really important.
What do you do? You know.
Yeah.
And finally, just before we let you go, given that you are about to announce your, you know, you will be launching your schemes shortly, and you will at some point, Chris, do you find that the same ideas come around again and again? for short films? I mean, is there, you know, in the old days it used to be kind of like there was the film with the kind of twist in the tail, the joke.
I know, the twist.
And then there was the kind of angst of my life.
Yeah, I mean, no, there's certain forms always exist.
I think there were some other things as well, but I didn't.
You know, and in terms of the zeitgeist, well, you used to look at, I mean, I don't know what's in the festival here, but I'm sure themes will emerge because certain things come up. You know, the last year I saw a lot of films about Alzheimer's and euthanasia, and, you know, there are certain themes that inevitably come up and feel like they're suitable. But
I mean, I was bemoaned, you know, I was bemoaned the fact that there are not enough good 5-minute comedy shorts. But that's just because of my animation background, because that's what we used to do, because animation sort of owned that space for a while, you know, in the Aardman days and so on, because that was what you want to do. So I always bemoan the fact that people don't, and it tends to actually, comedy tends to operate in 90 seconds, and, you know, a good piece of 5-10 minutes that's really well pulled through, I always go, please.
We are back here this afternoon in half an hour, I think. Is anyone in here who knows? 2:30. Thank you very much. Yes, we're going to talk about festivals. But meanwhile, just say thank you so much to Chris Moll, Chris Collins.